On your screen are cars being washed away in Pallikaranai. This was the impact of the cyclone storm Migjam that hit Chennai on December 4. If you are under the impression that the flooding in Chennai is just a natural calamity, well, you might want to revisit that. The issue is much deeper than that. The reason for Chennai's troubles is pretty simple. If you encroach on natural water bodies in the city, where will the water go? On your screen is the map of Chennai, Velachery and Adambakam localities from 1970. It is important to note how big the lakes are. Today though, the Adambakam lake is nowhere to be seen and the Velachery lake has shrunk remarkably. This is not some natural phenomenon. These areas have been urbanized and occupied by buildings and people over the years. I visited the Velachery Housing Board colony, which is right beside the lake. After the heavy rains on December 4, the waterlogging in this area was almost chest high. But 3 days later, the water is nowhere to be seen. It's been drained manually and normalcy seems to have returned in this particular area. The real problem is that the land for this colony was allocated by the government. The question is, why urbanize a lake? Where will the water settle when there is rain? Not so coincidentally, every year, Velachery is an area so severely affected by flooding and waterlogging because what should have been a lake is now a colony or an apartment. So where will the water drain? One other affected area, Pallikaranai, has a whole different tale to tell. What you are seeing behind me is the Pallikaranai Marshland. So the Pallikaranai Marshland at one point measured 6,000 hectares and it used to act as a floodwater drain for almost 250 square kilometers of South Chennai. Now it measures only 700 hectares. I spoke to Dr. Jayashree Venkatesan, who is the managing trustee of Care Earth Trust that specializes in biodiversity conservation. She has been working on preserving the Pallikaranai marshland for over 20 years.
Originally, we estimated that it would have been about 6,000 hectares in spread. Not contiguous, there were places where it was broken a bit by other kinds of systems, but overall it was about 6,000 hectares. In 2002, when we undertook a study to look at how much of it was actually there, we found there were actually 593.4 hectares, which essentially means 90% of the habitat was already lost. But post that, due to the continuous research that we've been doing and the kind of efforts that the government and the people have been putting in, we've been able to bounce back in the sense that we've been able to protect this 593 hectares, but also add on a few more hectares, and today we have 720 hectares of the marsh protected. That's all remains. It's still about 85 to 90% loss.
When asked where the problem lies, she says it is so wrong to perceive a piece of land as wasteland. According to her, no piece of land or nature is waste.
See, in nature there is nothing called waste. You and I may not derive a direct benefit out of it, but that doesn't mean that place is a wasteland. You've not been able to appreciate the value that it's been providing. Pallikaranai Marsh is a classic example of how wrong classification can have detrimental effect, not just then, but for decades to come. This entire area was classified as a wasteland. So the government saw it fit to allot this land to various institutions. In 2002, when we actually stepped in and said we identified about 593 hectares as being a marsh, except for 4 hectares, every other bit of land was already allotted to some scheme, some mega project, because it was a wasteland and people thought it was not a big problem allotting wasteland. This is fundamentally the problem.
The 377-acre SEZ campus one has to cross to reach the Forest Department's office was once part of the wetland. So were the Greater Chennai Corporation's dumping yard in Perungudi, 2 major roads connecting Old Mahabalipuram Road known as OMR and Tambaram Velachery Road, campuses of the National Institute of Ocean Technology, the National Institute of Wind Energy and a few other buildings. The National Institute of Ocean Technology lies right next to the remaining parts of the marshland, and the entire area was waterlogged inside and outside the institute, the roads surrounding it as well. Opposite the institute is an engineering college and some private sector buildings and the Assam Bhavan. What should have been a natural water drain is now filled with private and government buildings. Question does arise as to how was permission given for these entities to set up shop there.
See, one of the projects that kept re-emerging all through our work on Pallikaranai was to establish a golf course on Pallikaranai, because they said a few employees in that sector, in that area, are so overworked that they need time to relax. So you need to have a golf course. Can you imagine a golf course instead of a marsh? That's one thing. The second thing they came up with was to widen the road. Widen the road by scooping out all the wetlands and, reducing the area, all the cascading wetlands and widening the road.
Well, things have happened, mistakes have been made. Is it possible to restore marshlands? What is the way forward? What is the solution to Chennai's problems? As someone who has worked for decades to protect Chennai's most important marshland, here is what Dr. Jayashree had to say.
Wetlands, if they are very shallow, it's almost impossible to restore. That's the biggest problem with aquatic systems. Once gone, it's gone forever in most cases. Now, the core of the marsh is protected under the forest department. It's actually now a Ramsar site. It's probably one of the very few places in the world where bang in the middle of a metropolitan city you have a Ramsar site. What needs protection is the adjoining area, the buffer area. That is a kind of an open for all. If that is protected and if strict norms are brought about how to construct, how much to construct, what should be the density, then things will work out. It's also very clear that the time tested methods are not working. The straight cut canals, the stormwater drains, they're not working. When something is not working, it makes more sense to give it up and look for something better.
It is no coincidence that areas that were developed by encroaching water bodies are the ones that suffer nature's wrath every year. Scarily, there seems to be no clear-cut solution to this problem unless drastic measures are taken. Chennai has suffered, is suffering, and unfortunately, it could very well continue to suffer every year.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.